Welcome, everybody. So grateful to have you all joining. This is a really exciting and really important lunch and learn for us social workers to have an opportunity to hear and learn from first voice. We talk a lot about first voice, people who have lived experiences. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how intersectional bias can impact the ways in which people access and receive services, and what we as social workers need to know and understand in order to ensure safety for everyone. But first, what we are going to begin with is a land acknowledgement. On the bottom right, you will see placenames.mapdev.ca. That's one of the websites that we like to encourage our members to use because it's interactive. It even teaches you how to pronounce where you are located. Please join me in the chat and type out the Indigenous name of where you are located. If you are joining us in unceded Mi'kma'ki, then please feel free to use the Mi'kmaq name. But wherever you are joining us from, please join with me in this land acknowledgement. But before I read the land acknowledgement, I invite you to take a moment, close your eyes, and connect to the land that we want to acknowledge in gratitude. So perhaps it's a place that you feel especially connected to. Maybe it's your garden, maybe it's the beach, maybe it's a hiking trail or a park. But just take a moment to take a deep breath and connect to the land in gratitude. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Unama'ki, which is located in the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, may remain active to this day. Let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers commits to translating this acknowledgement into action by seeking to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially those regarding education. We commit to doing what we can to becoming better treaty partners. We commit to learning and to unlearning, as in unlearning all of the bias, all of the ways in which sometimes we have been conditioned to not fully understand. We are all treaty people. So let us reflect on how this will impact what we do and how we do it. And how can it guide our work together today? Decolonizing ourselves in our practice means recognizing the ways in which we are each impacted by the colonial system in which we all participate, and from which those of us of settler descent continue to benefit. So on your screen, you see one of the wheels of power and privilege and positionality and intersectionality. And we can see that there are different aspects of our identity, and each of us have our own unique location on this wheel. So those of us that are, for example, white, do not know what it's like to be Black or brown or Indigenous or Asian. Those of us, for example, who are cisgender do not know what it's like to be visibly gender nonconforming. Those of us who are able-bodied do not know what it's like to be visibly disabled. So one of the things that we are trying to do to ensure safer practice is those of us that have an experience, for example, I present as white. I don't know what it's like to be visibly racialized. That means that I need to be listening and learning from the lived experiences and first voices of those who are visibly brown, Black, Indigenous, and Asian. And this is one of the ways that we are using our truth and reconciliation commitments to unlearning bias by listening to the first voices of people whose experiences are different from our own. Each of us, depending upon our social location and our intersectional positionality, are uniquely oppressed. For example, those of us from African descent were dispossessed and uprooted from their land and brought to Turtle Island against their will. So when we talk about decolonizing ourselves, what it means is recognizing the unique ways that colonization has impacted each of us. And what does that mean in terms of how we see the world, how we see one another, and how does this impact our practice as social workers? So we are inviting, and this is going to be continuing to be part of the kind of professional development that we are wanting to engage in. And we invite us, as we do this initial land acknowledgement, to think about the unique impact of colonization upon each of us and our practice. And this is part of the new code of ethics. Hopefully you have signed up or checked and read and learned about the new code of ethics that we are trialing, which is pushing us from a stance of neutrality to a stance of non-neutrality. Because in a racist colonial world where there's bias that's part of the system, neutrality is actually a form of complicity. And so we are committing, as part of our truth and reconciliation commitments, to use our professional development to also unlearn beliefs that we may have absorbed from the world within which we live, recognizing that just like a fish does not understand what it's like to live outside of water, we don't know what it's like to live in a non-colonized world. And therefore, there's so much to unlearn. But we have an ethical mandate to do this in order to ensure safer social work practice and a more just world for all people. And so we're grateful that this new code of ethics, which we need your feedback to make sure that your voice and perspective is heard, which is requiring us to shift to fighting against all intersectional prejudice that is part of colonization. And today is one way that we are beginning to do that. Tomorrow, hopefully you will join us from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. We have a special day-long safety conference where we're going to be looking at the issue of safety from many, many different levels so that we as a profession can work towards undoing some of the harms that we have unintentionally or intentionally caused as a profession. In 2019, the Canadian Association of Social Workers apologized for harms that we have participated in. And today we're going to be learning from a first voice perspective so that we can begin to understand the impact of how bias can cause harm to others. And so that is the beginning of the work that we're going to do today. And with that, I am going to stop share. And I'm grateful to have all of you joining us. And I'm especially grateful to have Willow, who is going to be beginning and sharing a little bit of her story. And I got to hear Willow speak a little bit this summer at a Living Library event that was organized by Cape Breton Transgender Network as part of Pride. And the Living Library is this concept that instead of just reading from books, that people are living documents, and that there's so much that we should be learning from people's lived experiences. And this is actually inspiring our annual conference that is going to be in May. So stay tuned, because we're going to have opportunities to learn from many first voice accounts then as well. But Willow has graciously agreed to come and share a little bit of her story so that we as social workers can begin to understand how to provide safer social work practice. So with that, I'm going to remove my spotlight, and Willow, it's over to you. We are grateful to learn from you. Thank you so much for being here to share some of your story.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Willow Lattiser. I am 40, so over the hill, definitely still climbing. I have a condition called cerebral ataxia. This means there is atrophy in my cerebellum that affects mainly motor functions. I am happily married to Rose, my most supportive bestie in the whole world. We share everything in this amazing life, including three unique children who all have their own talents. Our oldest Yakos, whom my wife had in a previous relationship, has always been my buddy and my best friend, other than my wife. I'm sure for the most part, being active, hanging out with my family, exploring everything we could has helped me with my strength. I have had pain since I was a teen. However, I never knew I had something actually wrong. But my balance was not normal. I just thought I was clumsy. Then I had broken both legs 2 years apart. They took an abnormal amount of time to stop having a cast and struggling with crutches. The doctor said my bones healed like I was 80. Yet I prevailed. My cast came off, crutches were no longer needed. I was roughly 29. My balance never improved after the breaks. My doctor at the time suggested I use a cane to assist me. Next came the disability parking permit. I went back to work part time. I'm the homemaker. I prefer to do the cooking, cleaning, and being there for our children. My wife would usually work a lot longer hours. My time at home was not boring. I would fish, hike, play video games, garden, tend to the house. Most of the days would depend on what the kids were looking for. Whether anything I can do to bring smiles to their face was always making every day worth it. Around the age of 32, there was an attempt at becoming my true self. I was hospitalized after a blackout attempt on taking my own life. After receiving such negativity from family, friends, um, hospital staff, I went back to hiding my true self. Shortly after, I felt the need to do more. When I was not with my kids, I was very angry all the time. I hated myself and the person I felt I was being forced to be. I hid for several years until we moved to Cape Breton Island. Our first visit was in 2018, and we fell in love with this place. We felt it felt like home. We knew we wanted to move here. We just needed a plan. While still in hiding, I started seeing specialists, had hundreds of x rays. I was told I had fibromyalgia from a specialist in Ottawa. I had arthritis in my hands, feet, ankles, and legs. However, that was not the reason for my balance. And my speech was going downhill. Around that time, my older sister was diagnosed with MS. A light bulb seemed to go off, and my primary physician at the time said I need an MRI because she was certain that it was MS. That was late 2019. Then COVID lockdowns hit. The wait for non urgent MRI in Ontario went from 4 to 6 weeks up to 2 years. We had recently purchased land in Framboise, Nova Scotia. Sight unseen, we planned a trip to view the land and assess the work needed. We arrived June 24th, 2020, with the family. It needed a lot of work, and we didn't care. I felt at home. I didn't want to leave. It didn't matter that the bugs were horrible. It didn't matter that all we had were hand tools to clear the land. I was home. 2 days after we arrived, while getting wood for a campfire, I lost my balance and landed on my right arm. I was pretty sure I broke it. I didn't want to ruin our vacation, so I sucked up the pain and said I would go to the hospital when I got back to Ontario. When I got back to Ontario, the COVID numbers were bad. I didn't want to go anywhere near a hospital. I continued to just deal with pain. During the next 2 months, I drove 14,274 kilometers between Ontario and Nova Scotia. A shout out to Google Timeline for tracking my every move. Creepy. Multiple trips to bring things to the land to build the shed we needed for the power that summer. I never spent more than 48 hours back in Ontario. The stress in the air was so thick you can cut it with a knife. One trip back in August, we took some friends. They wanted to come and see the land. Once here, there was disagreement and we decided it was best for them to leave. Rose, my wife, flew up with their youngest child, Ezra, as I needed help to clear space for the power shed. The day after she arrived, and we knew she had everything she needed, as she would be in isolation, I left to bring their friends back to Ontario. During that trip, I hit a pothole in Framboise. Didn't know it affected my tire. I drove all the way to Fredericton, New Brunswick, before my tire had half worn away. Having dealt with the new tire and alignment, I was on my way back to Ontario. There was no need to quarantine Ontario. I stayed the night, loaded my car, and headed back to my comfort place. When I arrived back in Framboise, Rose and Ezra had an idea for me to have Ezra go to physical school in St. Peter's, opposed to virtual in Ontario. We registered her at East Richmond in St. Peter's. They provided busing to Framboise. We began to look at apartments once we were out of isolation, first in St. Peter's, but there was nothing. So we eventually looked in Sydney. Early September, we acquired an apartment in Sydney. Ezra convinced me to stay in East Richmond. She didn't want to transfer schools. She had found new friends also going between Sydney and Framboise. Held new adventures for us, and she didn't want to change schools again. I was still working in Framboise, so I saw no harm in her continuing at least until winter, and we can figure out schooling in Sydney together when Rose got back. Rose had flown back to Ontario in late August. Ezra stayed with me. We lived in Sydney. Her bus stop was in Framboise, so I would drive her back and forth every day, working on my land while she was at school. There was a couple occasions I called the school concerning possible homework and progress. About a week before my power inspection, I kept Esther home from school. We went out for breakfast, and then I finally went into the hospital to for my arm to the regional emergency room. It had indeed broken, but was now healed. Wrong. To fix it, they would have to re-break it. I declined. My speech was brought up by the nurse. I started explaining about my MRI waiting list in Ontario. I was in the process of moving here. I got a referral to the Sydney Primary Care Clinic. Leslie McCarthy at the time was seeing Leslie and getting a hold of my files from Ontario. She referred me for an MRI. October 2nd, East Richmond called child welfare on us. The school felt Ezra was living in a trailer in October and was bathing from a bucket. Children's Aid showed up on the day of my power hookup to my shed, October 6th. It was assumed that we were living in Framboise. I provided a copy of the lease of my apartment in Sydney. It was assumed I was intoxicated because of my balance and my speech. And the old alcohol cans from the garbage cleanup on the land, they apprehended our daughter. They apprehended our daughter from school that day. I was distressed. broke down, called my wife. She hopped the next flight and was here within 18 hours. Our daughter was placed in foster care with quarantine in place. Welfare refused to view her home. We spent Thanksgiving alone and away from our children. They finally viewed our apartment in Sydney 3 weeks later on a Friday. Immediately, they agreed to release her under a whole crapload of stipulations. We had to wait until Monday at court for them to release her, and they took till Monday night to bring her home. Sunday night, the rest of our family arrived, and we're now in quarantine in the downstairs apartment. With both my wife and myself here in Sydney, our roommate and two oldest children were left to get ready for the moving truck without much help because they had never moved long distance. So many irreplaceable, sentimental things were left behind. Things will never get back. About 5 days later, child welfare came to view the house and check on us. Pure later just dropped off my fragile pet tarantula, all banged up from the ride. I attempted CPR. My wife answered the door, led them in. I was in tears trying to revive her. My spider died. The biggest issues after Ezra came home, one of the stipulations was that I was not allowed to be the primary caregiver for my children. I need to have another adult around all the time to be the primary. I spent the next couple of months very distraught and in tears. On one trip between Framboise and Sydney, Yakos and I had a talk. I explained to him first that I was going to come out again, and this time for good. I told him I didn't know that what would happen between me and his mom. I told him I couldn't hide no more, no matter what reaction I got from people this time. Yako said they would support me and they would still be there no matter what. Yakos also told me he was sure he was also trans. Shortly after Christmas, about mid January, I was in tears, explaining to my wife that I need to be me. She accepted me as I was and asked me what I would like my name to be. I said Michelle Willow. The next day, we told the kids, and they were very accepting. Over the next couple of months, a lot happened. My MRI results came in. No MS, no scarring. But my cerebellum is so much smaller than it should be. It is atrophied and will continue to. Genetic testing showed no reason. The cause is unknown. I was diagnosed with idiopathic progressive cerebral ataxia. We just finished up mandatory psychological assessments from Children's Aid. Our youngest kids have mandatory psychoeducational assessments put in place by Children's Aid, which kept proving to them we had been telling the truth and we were not, and they were in the wrong. But but I will get back to that. The morning after Rose told me we need to find out the path we need to take, what we would need. She started researching the requirements, setting up my appointment to get the WPATH letter, so needed to start hormones. The closest appointment we can get was March. Rose reached out to Madonna Duzat, who put us in touch with Veronica, whom we recognized from churches in Marion Bridge. This time, I was becoming my true self. I was not surrounded by negative people, and it was such a relief to be me. I started by giving all my clothes to my son. Rose said I can wear anything of hers that fit, and we began to thrift shop for clothes together. We had the check-in with Children's Aid just a few days later after I came out, and they showed acceptance. In March, we got the W Path letter. The next day, we got a hold of my nurse practitioner. It was slower process than I was hoping for after 37 years of not being who I was meant to be. I was extremely hypertensive. A normal blood pressure day was 170 over 140. I worked with my nurse practitioner. We got my blood pressure normal with spironolactone combined with Coversil Plus. Finally, I got my HRT. I started to feel better about myself almost instantly. I can and will say this HRT saved my life. The person I became, I went from always in pain physically and emotionally and absolutely despising most things in life and having little to no faith. I found faith. I love myself. Every day is a new opportunity. I am me, my true self. I'm not afraid anymore. I worked in a few work at home jobs during COVID. In need of more social interaction, I began to look for work outside of the home. I enjoyed working with Paladin Security at the regional hospital, assisting others. I was only getting a couple of shifts a week, so I was looking for something else. While working with Paladin, my wife was working at Wendy's in Welton. The manager, Jay, at the time, wanted to hire me, so I gave it a shot. I was offered more hours than the security, so I no longer did casual shifts at the regional. I went from part time to full time at Wendy's. I was accepted as me by my staff and customers alike. Every work day was so eye opening. The friends I met after starting HRT, I truly felt as if they were friends. After the psychological assessments were done, Children's Aid dropped the stipulations of me not being allowed to be the primary. I could finally take my kids out hiking, McDonald's, simple little places, and have fun without having to have another adult be the primary. I was enjoying life. I would reminisce with my wife about the memories in the past when I was younger and I felt more like myself. The one time when I was younger, I was in a choir. I was about 8 or 9. I did a solo with Colors of the Wind. I hadn't hit puberty, so my voice was amazing. We talked about when I was younger, and my sister would dress me up in her dress and do my makeup, and I loved because it felt natural. Took a year, but finally, Children's Aid realized they were wrong and they closed the file. Every day is a new adventure, and even though there is no cure for cerebral ataxia and fibro, staying active helps the most. I hike the easy path to Coxie, um, which anyone who has done it can say it's not that easy. I walk on the beaches, collect sea glass. I swim in the ocean. My kids are fishes. We all have YMCA memberships. I work on my land slowly and carefully, and sometimes we go out to Framboys just to relax, be with nature, and not to work. My cerebral ataxia is progressing. I fall a lot more, my speech gets slurred, and I sound drunk, especially if I'm tired or overwhelmed. In April this year, I fell and hurt my back. My wife was concerned and made an appointment with my nurse practitioner. She put me off work and said it may be just stress related and see a few weeks would help. The falls got more frequent. So she said physio might help and put me off work longer. Once I started physio, they told me that it would help my strength, but it was not going to improve. On my 40th birthday, I was told I was not allowed to go back to work in a restaurant or place that posed risks of slips and falls, especially with the risk of burns. I was sad because Wendy's was my social point. I loved helping my coworkers and customers. I loved to be social. My kids like going to the youth project. drop in. So I asked Madonna if there was a way I could help. She gave us police check letters, and they were always looking for volunteers. So I love to help, and just because I can't work, I love to help, and just because I can't work doesn't mean I can't be social and helpful. I am always looking for ways to help the community, to help advocate for others. Currently, I still live in Sydney. Go to Framboise as often as I could. Being in nature is my therapy. I volunteer at the youth project, and I'm trying to get my foot in anywhere I can volunteer safely. I'm not a victim. I'm a strong, beautiful trans woman. I'm a survivor. I will continue to push for myself and others. I will fight and I will prevail. Thank you, Nash.
Thank you so very much for sharing of your story and your wisdom. We are so grateful and honored by you being able to share so much. I want you to see all the hearts that are coming. I'm so sorry for the ways in which bias has impacted you and your family, but we are so grateful that you are sharing some of your story with us. And really, one of the things that, and there's some comments coming in the chat about how you are a beautiful person, so please drink that in. We are so grateful to have you with us, and really the role of peer support is something that you are looking into in terms of how do you support other people who've been through similar experiences as you. You know what it's like to unfortunately be perhaps misunderstood, or people to make assumptions because of either appearances or how you sound or how you walk, and people look at the outside and don't see what's on the inside, and that can cause harm, as indeed unfortunately it happened to you and your family. I'm introducing now Veronica, who is with the Cape Breton Transgender Network and can probably say a little more. But Veronica, one of the things that she does is peer support, and can talk a little bit about the role of peer support in helping people navigate social services or the medical system. So Veronica, over to you.
Thank you, Naj. And thank you so much, Willow, for sharing your story so authentically. It's always lovely to hear you speak, and it's lovely to have you wanting to speak and do what you do with the Youth Project. So, as I'm sure some people have got to know me, I transitioned 30 years ago. I came to Cape Breton about 60 years ago and have been doing a lot of advocacy work in my journey, and a lot more so more recently. I'm going to share, and I hope Willow doesn't mind. I'm going to, yeah, thank you, Willow. I think you know where I'm going to go with this one. So I think this was last year somewhere. I seem to remember it was cold too. So Willow called me on, phone me up. She was at the Cape Breton Regional emergency room. She was she was trying to get help at the emergency room, and it had not gone particularly well when she got to registration. And she called me up in tears, asking me to go and help. And within 20 minutes, which probably meant I broke a few speed restrictions, but whatever, I was at the hospital and found her. And having, got alongside her, and chatted about the situation, how she was feeling, and the relief, the initial relief that I could see on her as she knew somebody that else was there that was going to help her, is one of the big things that happens with peer support. It's knowing that you're not alone. And then we went into the emergency room. We went back to the registration piece, which is where the dead naming and misgendering was happening. And you've heard Willow speak now. I'm sure there is a lot of occasions where people, like the child services, think that Willow is drunk or on drugs or something else and just don't believe her and don't listen to her. And I sat down and I did the registration piece with the staff that were behind the desk. And the really sad thing for me was this was not the first time I'd sat down with the staff behind the desk at registration, one of whom at least recognized me as coming in to advocate for somebody. The staff knew what they could do, so that I understand as an advocate that they have limitations to the forms that they have to work with are very restrictive and prescriptive around name and gender to do with MSI registration. And that's a whole other topic that for a different day and a different talk. But there are ways that the staff knew how to work around the forms that just gave that little piece of understanding around gender identity and dead naming. And they did it. And Willow's visit with the rest of the ER staff was flawless. First voice advocacy and peer support is terribly important for the reasons that I gave in this example. Somebody coming alongside somebody else who, in this case, has that first voice and lived experience. I know what it's like to go into somewhere and have to be dead named, to not have your gender acknowledged, to be misgendered. But I've had that experience for years and I know how to deal with that. Somebody like a lot of the transgender people in particular that I help are often at the beginning of their journey. They are often in some of the most vulnerable places people find themselves, and they need to be understood. They need to be able to have those conversations with somebody where they don't have to explain themselves because the advocate understands. And I found more recently that I'm starting to be asked to be advocate for people who aren't necessarily transgender, but who still need somebody to advocate for them. And this particularly happens in the health service, unfortunately. So I have been with people for medical appointments where they have felt that they're not being listened to for whatever reason, and they need somebody else there to be with them. So the power, to me, the power of peer support is that you don't have to explain. And I talk about this in some peer support groups, that the reason that they're so powerful is that they're a place where you don't have to explain yourself because somebody already knows. And there's this notion that if I have to explain something, no amount of words are going to be enough to explain that. But when you have the right person or advocate or peer support person with you, or you're in a support group, you don't need to say anything and everybody understands it. And that piece around peer support is immensely powerful for the individual that you are supporting and advocating for. I think that's probably the core of my message, and I thank Naj for the time to at least just get this one piece over. And thank you, Willow, again for sharing your story and for inviting me in to be part of your life as an advocate, and to share your beautiful family. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, for sharing a little bit more about peer support. And really the role of peer support is about helping people who have intersectional bias that they live with and that they encounter in our healthcare social service agencies, who may not, because of that bias, may not see the person in front of them, but may be looking at certain things and assuming, and those assumptions can cause tremendous harm, as Willow shared, not just to her, but to her family. And, the long-term enduring consequences of that. And having someone who can be by your side so you don't feel alone in a system that you don't trust is profound. It helps, that emotional safety helps that journey unto itself, and is one of the ways that we could be building more safety into our healthcare system. So I'm going to turn it over to Willow now, and ask Willow to share perhaps what you think social workers, healthcare providers should know or understand about what it's like to go into other situations, like other institutions, like the hospital, having already experienced being discriminated against, and then what, from a peer support perspective, like what is helpful, what isn't helpful, what do you need, what can help you feel safer when navigating, whether it's social services or healthcare services or other contexts. So hold on one second. I'm going to invite you to unmute. So I'll ask you to unmute. Perfect.
Okay, so in my experiences, I've been able to witness both sides because I've gotten a lot of peer support, but there's a lot of people that I've encountered that don't get the peer support, and a lot of the times they do have access to it, but they've had a situation where something has went wrong with the healthcare professional or some support in some way, so they don't want to reach out to anybody for support. Um, I find like with I was gonna mention the situation at the hospital or the regional hospital Veronica had helped me with. But I appreciated her explaining in better detail. But as for like children's aid or child protective services, um, when you go to assess a family, the consideration should be taken to properly assess a situation without assumption. The first thing would be active listening. It's always key. Investigate by speaking with multiple parties involved in the situation, like the school, physicians, neighbors, family. Conclusions should not be brought forth with just assumption. If a child is apprehended from a loving family, the emotional or psychological damage to that child is irreversible. Um, and I don't want it to happen to anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you so very
Have
much for sharing a little more, and we're going to open it up for questions. There's already been
Sure.
one question that's come up, and it's what do you feel as a society um, can be done to make your life journey easier and more worth it?
That directed me.
It's for either of you, but I think it was really for you, Lola. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's basically don't assume and ask questions and just try to just think about other people's feelings before you assume like that's other than that, there's life has got to be your own journey, and if you can find a way to heal from it, then try to spread the healing. um don't don't sit there and bottle things up. And that's like one of the worst things. As long as you don't assume things and just try to live your life to the fullest, shouldn't have to hide, and society should not make it so you need to feel the need to hide, because it's it's ridiculous. I did hide for most of my life, and I only felt safe away from all my family, and so I had to do it here. It's definitely society's got to feel more accepting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Um, another, Veronica, I wasn't sure if you were getting ready to respond to that question
No.
or, okay. Another question that came up is how does one show peer support without making it seem like pity? And I think maybe the question is also like, how does one show allyship? And maybe it might be worth talking about what's the difference between allyship and peer support, right? Because allyship is about like we're advocating with, and peer support is you're I've been through this, you're going through this, I'm going through this because I've been through this. I know the journey. But how what are things that peers can do to and allies can do to make people feel safe?
Listen, listen is the main thing. You gotta listen.
Yeah, I mean, Naj nailed the difference between peer support and allyship, and I think that really is the distinctive difference. And I think for peer support, there's that innate knowledge that you know you don't need to explain yourself, which for a lot of situations is incredibly powerful. And I think that's probably why the peer support in difficult situations is so much more valuable than the allyship, right? So whilst the allyship piece, if you were to ally me with some situation, I would appreciate that. I would still feel that you might not necessarily understand that in all of the nuances that a peer would understand that, and I wouldn't have to think that I might need to explain myself. So even those small nuances of thinking I might need to explain myself put me in a slightly different position than if it was a peer
Mhm.
support. Um, I does that explain it? It is a tough one, but yeah, it's
So
Can I?
please.
I was gonna say, like, I agree with the peer support. The biggest thing is explaining yourself over and over. I think that is the
yeah,
worst thing somebody can go through. And if having the peer support to be able to not have to go through that over and over, definitely that is one of the greatest parts.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that because it's true. Retelling our story can be traumatizing. And, for example, knowing that I might get assumed to be, I'm used to getting assumed either by being misgendered or I'm used to people making an assumption about this or that. And so I having to always begin by explaining myself already puts the power dynamic of that
Mhm.
relationship. I'm already feeling like unsafe that I need to begin by explaining myself or educating.
It's always feeling like you're in a defensive state
yeah.
because you have to explain. You shouldn't have to explain.
One of the ways that peer support is used sometimes is not just in terms of intersectional identity, which is really the focus of this conversation, is how do we use a peer that has experienced prejudice or bias or discrimination or assumptions to by a system that has those biases built in, doesn't have policies or computer technology to, you know, have multiple genders, for example, or have other ways of assessing whether somebody is dealing with an addiction issue instead of just listening to someone's speech and making an assumption. The one way to use peer support is to address bias and discrimination. Another way that peer support is sometimes used is around depression or addiction. So, for example, if I struggle with depression and I think that life isn't worth living, it's really hard maybe to go to a therapist or a doctor who has never personally experienced depression and doesn't know what it's like to feel that. And so they may have very well-meaning interventions about try to think positive and try to do good things. But if it peer support is someone who's been like, I know exactly what it's like to be like, I'm not sure I want to make it another day. And that's a different level of safety. What are your thoughts about how maybe healthcare providers could be bringing in peer support? Like, what would be helpful to you on that level? So Willa, like you, when I said like it's easy for a therapist to be like, think positive, and you laughed, like
Yeah,
you've been told
and
that
yeah,
before.
it's because yeah, like if they don't have the life experience, that they haven't gone through situations, like I've seen a lot of different therapists and counselors, and a lot of them are like, "How do you even cope with everything you've been through?" And I'm like, "I just do." And you have to learn and grow from it. And a lot of counselors and therapists and health professionals, unfortunately, they're in that job, but it's the wrong job for them. It takes a lot of time to get into that profession because sometimes if you don't experience it, you don't have any lived experience, then you're not gonna make as much as a difference as you want.
And so that's really where a peer person can be that bridge for someone who has not had that lived experience, but who can do some of that translating, who can be like, I've been there, and be also able to model that hope as well. Um, for example, like I've been there, now I can say like, I promise it gets better. It means something different from someone who's been through that same journey than someone who's not. Um, so what are your thoughts about how a peer support person could be indirected, it could be involved or integrated into a healthcare team?
Well, it was pretty easy in my situation. Like I kind of just spoke to my doctor and I asked her, I'm like, do you mind if Veronica comes along? And she's like, yeah, sure, anyone you want. Like it all depends on the healthcare profession and their attitude and their perspective, because they're in their profession and they have previous biases, whether it be based on hereditary, might be in their family or something like that. Again, it's not the right profession. You need to have somebody else in there that's gonna actually care about all their patients, care about the clients. Because if the care is not there, then they're gonna have issues with the client or patient bringing in peer support. The healthcare professional needs to be able to listen, and if they don't have active listening, a lot of the time, because I've went through dozens of doctors back in Ontario, and a lot of them didn't care. And the ones I've had here, I've been very lucky, and they both cared like greatly. And I've been so lucky in that aspect.
I'm grateful that you had that. Thank you so much. Veronica, any thoughts on the integration?
Yeah, I've got lots of thoughts. Um, um, there's, I think it's important that maybe healthcare and other system-based support pieces have the availability of patient advocates. And for that to really work, they've got to be able to work within the system, but without the system. And I think it's terribly important that they get first voice training. And that's partly why everybody's here today, is that we get that chance to share this first voice to those who don't always get that chance to hear it. And hopefully that brings some peace around, an understanding of some of that nuance, but having people to be able to call on. So in the instance that the example I gave, Willow called me because she didn't know who else to call, and I don't know who else she would have called, but and I'm well aware of that. I'm well aware of what I can bring to those instances. And if I can do that, I'm sure that with training, others can do that as a patient advocate and get it right. And, if they're willing to learn and the all important listen and hear, they will become more and more powerful. But listening and hearing is a huge part of any advocate.
Yeah, and sorry.
That's fine.
Now I was going to say, and that's what Willow was saying, is that the most important thing is to be able to listen. But Willow was a really strong advocate for herself and was able to say, I need someone to be here.
Right.
But how different would it have been if the doctor had said, hey, would you like to have someone who's been through this come with you, like immediately, like as an offer, instead of you having to ask it for yourself.
Right. And I often get asked to go with people after they've had difficult situations, and how much that could be alleviated if, doctors had that as something and they recognized that it was going to be a situation, or that somebody needed somebody early and had that available to them.
So there are lots more questions that are coming in terms of training, in terms of support, in terms of guidelines, and this is something that we're going to have to all figure out together as a society. And so we'll have to continue this conversation. We're so grateful to you both for sharing some of your wisdom and experience. Willow, there was one last question that I think was directed towards you, and it was, what keeps you going? What helps you, like what brings you that joy to keep you going? Your source of resilience was the question. So what keeps you motivated to keep trying despite everything you've gone through?
Well, in my situation, having access to advocates like Veronica has given me the perspective on how I want to live my life, and I want to help others. And being able to be in the air and helping others, it gets me through all the time. I know I'm 40, but I'm pursuing a career in psychology. So if I lose my mobility, whatever, at least the career will be on the right path, and I'll be able to help somebody and have a lot of lived experience.
Well, we want you to know that you have helped so many people today by sharing of your story so bravely and courageously, and helping us think about what we can do to make sure that the people we work with feel safe or safer. And if we don't know what it's like to be them, because nobody knows exactly what it's like to be anyone else, then this is maybe something we can begin to advocate for, how to have more peer support in our healthcare system, and also to be thinking about how we as healthcare providers and social workers can be learning from the lived experience of the people we serve. So thank you for being our teacher. Thank you for taking your really horrifically challenging and painful experiences, but being willing to to share them so that we can make sure that others are safer and have better experiences. We are so grateful to all of you for sharing. Thank you to everyone putting the love in the chat. And we are grateful to all of you watching on YouTube. Thank you for helping us advocate for safer care for all people.